Calls for President Biden and top military officials to resign. That's after U.S. troops fully withdrew from Afghanistan, but American citizens remain. The last U.S. military plane departing Kabul yesterday marked the end to a 20-year presence there. Now, questions remain as to what happens to the gear left behind and the Afghan allies still in the country. And a wounded war veteran is now the first American man to win gold in a Paralympic triathlon. Tune in to Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. America's longest war is over. And now there's calls for President Biden and top military officers to resign. The House of Freedom Caucus is voicing concern over the way the evacuation in Afghanistan was handled.
To call for the resignation of a sitting president is a somber affair. We recognize the failure of our executive, and it's the right thing to do for the President of the United States to preserve some modicum of honor and to step down.
But it's not just Biden feeling the pressure. The House of Freedom Caucus is calling for Secretary of State Antony Blinken to be impeached.
We believe that he has got culpability for much of the travesty that has gone on here.
Nearly 90 retired generals and admirals are calling on top military officials to resign. They are calling on Secretary of Defense Lloyd and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley to resign over the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Their open letter reads, "The hasty retreat has left an unknown number of Americans stranded in dangerous areas controlled by a brutal enemy, along with Afghans who supported American forces." Adding, the retired flag officer signers believe these top military advisors should have resigned as a matter of conscience and public statement. They go on to state the consequences of this disaster are enormous and will reverberate for decades, beginning with the safety of Americans and Afghans who are unable to move safely to evacuation points, therefore being de facto hostages of the Taliban. The death and torture of Afghans has already begun and will result in a human tragedy of major proportions. In addition, the loss of billions of dollars in our advanced military equipment and supplies falling into the hands of our enemies is catastrophic. The damage to the reputation of the United States is indescribable. We will be seen for many years as an unreliable partner in any multinational agreement or operation. Trust in the United States is irreparably damaged. They also go into the geopolitical implications going forward, saying now our adversaries are emboldened to move against America due to the weakness displayed in Afghanistan. China benefits the most, followed by Russia, Pakistan, Iran, North Korea, and others. Terrorists around the world are energized and can pass freely into our country through our open border with Mexico and among the inadequately vetted Afghan refugees. They end by stating a fundamental principle in the military is holding those in charge responsible and accountable for their actions or inactions. There must be accountability at all levels for this tragic and avoidable debacle. America's longest war officially over last night. Taliban fighters firing off celebratory rounds just hours after the last American troops left.
It's a mission that brought Osama bin Laden to a just end, along with many of his al-Qaeda co-conspirators. And it was not a cheap mission. The cost was 2,461 U.S. service members and civilians killed, and more than 20,000 who were injured.
A U.S. military conducting what it calls its largest non-combatant evacuation in history over the last 18 days.
More than 123,000 people have been safely flown out of Afghanistan. That includes about 6,000 American citizens.
Despite the United States' historic efforts, the United States top general in the Middle East says that they weren't able to get everybody out that they wanted to get out.
I think if we'd stayed another 10 days, Louis, we wouldn't have gotten everybody out that we wanted to get out. And there still would have been people who would have been disappointed with that. It's a tough situation.
The mission to get people out is still underway. The United Nations Security Council has now approved a resolution for creating safe passage for people still seeking to leave Afghanistan from the Kabul airport, warning the Taliban that they should know that the world is watching them closely. And now Republicans in the House are demanding answers. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has strong words about the evacuation.
I see as probably the biggest failure in American government on a military stage in my lifetime. and we could never make this mistake again.
He's also calling for a plan to get the remaining American citizens out, saying,
"What is the plan to get Americans out? Never in my lifetime would I ever believe America would have an administration knowingly make a decision to leave Americans behind."
McCarthy is also calling on lawmakers to come back from their recess to consider a new bill. The bill would force the Biden administration to give regular updates on Americans still in Afghanistan. It would also require an evacuation plan to be laid out in detail.
For the administration to tell us what weaponry was left, what's the plan to get Americans home safely, so everyone could know and we could work towards that.
The latest numbers from the State Department show there are about 250 Americans remaining in Afghanistan. McCarthy says they will not be left behind. He wants a plan to get them out. McCarthy said Biden's decision to stick to the August 31st deadline has ramifications beyond just Afghanistan. And as McCarthy mentioned, hours after the U.S. military officially withdrew from Afghanistan Monday, video surfaced of Taliban fighters celebrating at Kabul's airport. They can be seen sitting inside cockpits of airplanes and helicopters the U.S. provided to the Afghan Air Force. While U.S. forces were able to get some of the equipment out of the country, much of it was abandoned. The Pentagon says troops disabled the gear before they left Afghanistan.
They can inspect all they want. They can look at them. They can walk around, but they can't fly them. They can't operate them. We made sure to demilitarize, to make unusable all the gear that is at the airport, all the aircraft, all the ground vehicles. The only thing that we left operable are a couple of fire trucks and some forklifts so that the airport itself can remain more operational going forward.
Taliban fighters have plenty of weapons, ammunition, and vehicles provided by the U.S. that they seized from military bases in other parts of Afghanistan as they took over the country. The group has pledged to allow people who still want to leave but couldn't make it to the airport to do so. There are still as many as 200 Americans and more Afghans who are trying to get out. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. is working with its allies to help reopen Kabul's airport to commercial flights as soon as possible. But it's not clear when that will happen. And President Biden addressing the nation Tuesday afternoon about what happens next regarding Afghanistan.
I was not going to extend this forever war, and I was not extending a forever exit. The decision to end the military airlift operations at Kabul airport was based on the unanimous recommendation of my civilian and military advisors, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and all the service chiefs, and the commanders in the field. 20 service members were wounded in the service of this mission. 13 heroes gave their lives. I was just at Dover Air Force Base for the dignified transfer. We owe them and their families a debt of gratitude we can never repay, but we should never, ever, ever forget. To ISIS-K, we are not done with you yet. We'll hunt you down to the ends of the earth, and you will pay the ultimate price.
And as to what the situation will be like inside Afghanistan, Taliban spokesman said on Twitter last Friday, all those who have government goods, equipment, weapons, ammunition, or vehicles need to hand them over to the relevant department. He said the handover is necessary, so there is no need for the offenders to be prosecuted or dealt with legally if the weapons are discovered. He says they must do so by September 3rd or face punishments, but it's unclear what the punishment is. Also unclear is whether the gun confiscation plan entails weapons that were not provided by the Afghan government. Now, let's take a moment to go over some numbers. A review of total evacuation numbers. The Pentagon says since August 14th, U.S. military aircraft have evacuated more than 79,000 civilians from the airport in Kabul. That's over an 18-day period. That includes 6,000 Americans and more than 73,500 third country nationals and Afghan civilians. This last category includes special immigrant visas, consular staff, at-risk Afghans and their families. In total, U.S. and coalition aircraft combined to evacuate more than 123,000 civilians, which were all enabled by U.S. military service members who were securing and operating the airfield. The Pentagon goes on to say, on average, more than 7,500 civilians were evacuated per day over the 18 days of the mission, which includes 16 full days of evacuations and more than 19,000 on a single day. These numbers do not include the roughly 5,000 service members and their equipment that was sent to Afghanistan to secure the airfield and were withdrawn at the conclusion of the mission. Now, that's the numbers going out. Let's take a moment to go back 20 years. Over 7,000 days ago, on October 7, 2001, President George W. Bush announced the U.S. military carried out the first airstrikes against al-Qaeda in the aftermath of 9/11. Bush said, "We will not waver, we will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail. Peace and freedom will prevail." Over those 20 years, the U.S. presence in Afghanistan and Iraq has cost $2 trillion, but it's also cost human life. 2,461 U.S. service members killed, 20,000 injured, 3,846 U.S. contractors killed, 66,000 Afghan military and police killed, 47,245 Afghan civilians killed, 51,191 Taliban and opposition fighters killed. Now, what about the Afghan allies still in the country? A group of former U.S. Green Berets and SEAL team members launched a mission called Pineapple Express. That's named after an Afghan commando they had served with. The commando had contacted them, saying he was on the run from the Taliban and his visa was not approved when the Taliban took over. They had been at work since August 15th. The task force worked with the U.S. military at the Kabul airport. They told the Afghan troops and their families to go to the airport gate and identify themselves with the password pineapple or show pictures of pineapples on their phones. They were then put on board a plane. The group also went into Kabul at night to take people to the airport. The task group says they moved as many as 630 Afghans into the airport as of Thursday morning. Some of those rescued were wounded in the terrorist attack that day. Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, a former Green Beret commander leading the mission, told ABC this Herculean effort couldn't have been done without the unofficial heroes inside the airfield who defied their orders to not help beyond the airport perimeter by wading into sewage canals and pulling in these targeted people who were flashing pineapples on their phones. One of the members, a former Navy SEAL, expressed deep frustration, saying our own government didn't do this. We did what we should do as Americans. And now in some lighter news, Brad Snyder was blinded by an explosive device while serving in Afghanistan. But that didn't stop him. Snyder raced alongside his guide and fellow triathlete Greg Billington. He's taking the gold just 3 years after switching from competing in swimming. He won this year's event 55 seconds ahead of second place Hector Catala of Spain. The race is for visually impaired athletes. Snyder played to his strength and broke out ahead during the swimming portion, and he stayed strong during biking and running, leaving Tokyo with gold. In his Paralympic swimming career, he won 7 medals, including 5 golds. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.